I would be speaking on tumor lysis syndrome. Introduction. It is the most common disease-related emergency in cancers. It was first reported by Bedana and Polak in chronic leukemia patients treated with irradiation in 1929. Most commonly, it develops in patients of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and leukemias. It occurs when the tumor cells release their contents into the bloodstream spontaneously or in response to therapy. Basically, four electrolyte abnormalities are seen: hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, hyperuricemia, and hypocalcemia. The manifestations of these abnormalities lead to acute kidney injury, abnormal heart rhythms, muscle cramps and weakness, and seizures. We will discuss in the following slides how we are going to identify and manage these conditions in tumor lysis syndrome. The incidence of tumor lysis is around 3 to 7% in leukemia patients and 4 to 11% in lymphomas. Relevant physiology. When the cell lysis occurs, the purines from the tumor cells, which mainly consist of adenine and guanine, are converted to hypoxanthine. The hypoxanthine, in the presence of xanthine oxidase, is converted to xanthine. The xanthine, again in the presence of xanthine oxidase, is converted to uric acid. The uric acid, in the presence of urate oxidase, is converted to allantoin. What we need to observe here is xanthine and uric acid are both nephrotoxic. It is only allantoin which is water soluble, hence it can be excreted from the kidneys. The basic definition of tumor lysis syndrome can be modulated as a group of metabolic derangements including hyperuricemia, hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, hypercalcemia, and uremia caused by massive and abrupt release of cellular components into the blood after the rapid lysis of malignant cells. Basically, the Cairo and Bishop classification system was developed in the year 2004, and they have actually divided it into laboratory tumor lysis syndrome and clinical tumor lysis syndrome. In the laboratory tumor lysis criteria, there are abnormalities in two or more of the following, that is the uric acid more than 8, the potassium more than 6, the phosphate more than 4.5, and the calcium less than 7 were characterized to be occurring within 3 days before or 7 days after chemotherapy. What is to be observed is of the 25% rise of uric acid, the potassium, the phosphate, and the calcium was emphasized. In clinical tumor lysis syndrome, the laboratory tumor lysis syndrome plus one or more of the following, which consisted of increased serum creatinine 1.5 times the upper limit of the normal, the cardiac arrhythmias or sudden cardiac death, and seizures. But there was a problem with this definition. Uh, there should have been emphasized that two or more of the abnormalities should have been present simultaneously, and 25% increase from the baseline is not clinically significant if the value is not out of the normal range, and symptomatic hypocalcemia should constitute the tumor lysis syndrome, which has been omitted in the original definition. So a modification to the Cairo and Bishop definition was done in the year 2011, and Howard et al. Have published it. They have basically removed the 25% change and they have included the clinical symptoms of hypocalcemia like cardiac dysrhythmias, the tetany, the paresthesias, the muscle twitching, carpopedal spasm, Proseuss sign, Schoftex sign, laryngospasm, bronchospasm have been added to the definition. Based on these classification of laboratory tumor lysis syndrome and clinical tumor lysis syndrome, the Cairo and Bishop grading system was delivered. What we need to observe in this is the grade 3 and the grade 4 part of the Cairo and Bishop grading, where the cardiac arrhythmias which are symptomatic and incompletely controlled or medically or controlled with a device, and the seizures in which consciousness is altered, poorly controlled, or the seizure disorder with breakthrough generalized seizures despite medical intervention, and the grade 4 where life-threatening arrhythmias are present in and seizure of any kind which is prolonged, repetitive and difficult to control. These two grades would eventually land up into our ICU. The grade 1 and the grade 2 are not the non-urgent indications of the cardiac arrhythmias and the seizures. Pathophysiology of tumor lysis syndrome. The rapid turnover of the tumor cell is that they live and die at an accelerated rate. After the anti-neoplastic therapy, the cellular death rate is partially increased. The dead cells release their contents into the bloodstream. The lab detectable components of these consist of the potassium phosphate, the LDH, then also the urate is detected as it comes from the purine metabolism. The clinical effects are mainly due to the renal failure caused by the urate crystals and due to the cardiovascular consequences of hyperkalemia. So what we need to understand is all the byproducts of the purine metabolism, if they are overwhelming the kidney's ability to clear them, that is when the tumor lysis syndrome occurs. If the kidneys have no problem in excretion of these byproducts, then obviously there would be no tumor lysis syndrome. It is on this basic concept that the whole clinical features of tumor lysis syndrome occur. Not only these byproducts of uric acid, phosphate and the potassium, it is also the cytokines which are released uh, also lead to hypotension and inflammation. The hypotension itself is an independent risk factor which aggravates the tumor lysis syndrome. The hyperuricemia is as a consequence of the catabolism of the purine nucleic acid to hypoxanthine and xanthine and then to uric acid via the enzyme xanthine oxidase. Marked increase in the uric acid excretion results in the precipitation of the uric acid in the renal tubules, and they can cause renal vasoconstriction and impaired autoregulation, decreased renal blood flow and inflammation. The uric acid is poorly soluble in water, particularly in acidic environment in distal tubules and the collecting system of the kidney. The overproduction and the overexcretion of the uric acid in tumor lysis syndrome leads to crystal precipitation. The hyperphosphatemia, the phosphorus concentration in the malignant cells is almost 4 times that of normal. There will be a rapid tumor breakdown. Because of this, the hyperphosphatemia and calcium phosphate deposition occurs, which will lead to acute kidney injury. Precipitation in the heart will lead to cardiac arrhythmias. After the use of hypouricemic agents, the nephrocalcinosis becomes the major cause of acute kidney injury. Xanthinuria. The allopurinol blocks the catabolism of hypoxanthine and xanthine. Patients receiving allopurinol are at the risk of xanthine precipitation and xanthine nephropathy. Xanthine concentration is not increased by rasburicase, as we have seen in the basic physiology diagram. The clinical manifestations of tumor lysis syndrome include symptoms like lethargy, syncope, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, muscle cramps, and pruritus. As we see, these clinical features are all because of our 4 abnormalities: the hyperkalemia, the hyperphosphatemia, the hyperuricemia, and hypocalcemia. And in the same way, the signs like the neurological signs like seizures and sudden death, dysrhythmias and cardiac arrest, muscle weakness, and carpopedal spasms also develop. The risk factors for the development of tumor lysis syndrome include cancer-related risk factors like a large burden of tumor. When a large burden of tumor is there, obviously the higher number of cells will lyse with treatment, and this will lead to increased chance of tumor lysis syndrome. The neoplastic infiltration of the bone marrow, where there will be hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, and nephromegaly, and obviously a stage will come where bone marrow is replaced with leukemic cells, and this becomes a bulky disease. And tumors with a high mitotic rate or a high rate of division also lead to increased risk of tumor lysis syndrome. Tumors which are highly chemosensitive also lead to increased lysis. Then there can be certain patient-related risk factors like pre-existing nephropathies, which can occur because of hypertension, diabetes, gout, or any other reasons, will lead to increased tumor lysis. Dehydration and volume depletion will also occur, where the urine flow through the tubules decreases and phosphorus and uric acid can crystallize, further aggravating the nephropathy. The hypotension which is there also decreases the urine flow so that the solutes can crystallize. Hypotension can independently also cause tumor lysis syndrome. Then apart from which, the nephrotoxins also like vancomycin, aminoglycosides, contrast agents for diagnostic imaging and other potential nephrotoxins increase the risk of acute kidney injury, and these will also lead to lysis of the cancer cells. So these risk factors have to be remembered because our prevention and our management strategy actually is devised on the risk for tumor lysis syndrome. If we observe at this flow chart of tumor lysis syndrome, we can see that we are anyhow monitoring our potassium, phosphorus, calcium, creatinine, uric acid, and the urine output levels. So here, if there is a less than 1 abnormal value, obviously there is no tumor lysis syndrome at diagnosis. At this time, we assess for the cancer mass. If the cancer mass is small, obviously negligible risk for tumor lysis syndrome. Hence, no prophylaxis and no monitoring is needed. If a medium-sized cancer mass is there, we have to assess for the cell lysis potential. If the cell lysis potential is low, again negligible risk. If medium cell lysis potential is there, we look out for the risk factors for the tumor lysis syndrome, as we have discussed earlier. If no risk factors are there, we treat it as low risk of clinical TLS. If risk factors are present, intermediate risk of clinical TLS. Here we observe that if low risk for TLS is there, IV fluids, allopurinol and laboratory tests are done every 24 hourly. But if intermediate risk for clinical TLS are there, IV fluids, allopurinol or rasburicase, inpatient monitoring is done, and laboratory tests turnover rate is increased to 8 to 12 hours. And if high risk of tumor lysis is there, obviously patients are at a high risk of tumor lysis syndrome. Hence, intravenous fluids and rasburicase is used with cardiac monitoring, and laboratory tests are sent every 6 to 8 hourly. In the same way, if there is a large cancer mass, again divided as low, medium and high risk for lysis potential. And if low risk, there will be a low risk for clinical tumor lysis syndrome. And medium risk for cell lysis will lead to intermediate risk of tumor lysis syndrome, and high risk of cell lysis leads to high risk of clinical tumor lysis syndrome, managed appropriately with either rasburicase or allopurinol as discussed earlier. If more than 2 abnormal values are there, obviously laboratory tumor lysis syndrome is diagnosed, and if laboratory tumor lysis syndrome is diagnosed, then the patient is at a high risk of clinical tumor lysis syndrome. So, in this case, intravenous fluids, rasburicase, and cardiac monitoring and laboratory tests turnover is increased to 6 to 8 hours. Then, if more than 2 values are there with abnormal values are there with clinical tumor lysis syndrome, like acute kidney injury, hypocalcemia, and dysrhythmias are also there, then it is an established clinical tumor lysis syndrome. In established tumor lysis syndrome, IV fluids, rasburicase, cardiac monitoring, and obviously intensive care unit monitoring and laboratory tests are done every 4 to 6 hours. In our further slides, we'll see how we manage in depth. So the basic concept of managing these patients are how do we prevent them and how do we treat them. So prevention includes using hydration, allopurinol and phosphate binders. Normally if any chemotherapy is planned, we have to start preventing the tumor lysis syndrome almost 24 hours before. So fluid therapy is the most important thing, and we have to target at almost 3000 ml per meter square per day. Urinary alkalization is a very controversial concept because in acidic urine the uric acid is precipitated, and in alkaline urine the calcium phosphate is precipitated. So anyhow, something or the other gets precipitated. So no point in alkalizing the urine. Then metabolic alkalosis can worsen the neurological manifestations of hypocalcemia. So maintaining a normal pH is of utmost importance. The prophylaxis and the treatment guidelines of tumor lysis syndrome has been given by this British Committee for Standards in Hematology. What they say is patients due to receive chemotherapy for any hematological malignancy should have a risk assessment for tumor lysis syndrome. The low risk patients can be managed with careful attention of the monitoring and measurement of the fluid status and laboratory results, with a low threshold for recourse to intravenous fluids and consideration of the allopurinol if needed. The intermediate risk patient should be offered up to 7 days of allopurinol prophylaxis along with the hydration post initiation of the treatment or until the risk of tumor lysis syndrome has resolved. The high risk patient should be offered prophylaxis with rasburicase along with increased hydration. Rasburicase should be avoided in patients with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Such patients should be treated with fluids and allopurinol and should be monitored very carefully. Urate assays taken whilst the patient is receiving rasburicase must be sent to the laboratory on ice to prevent falsely low assay results. In high risk adults, in the absence of established clinical or laboratory tumor lysis syndrome, the TLS can be prevented in majority of the patients using a single fixed dose of 3 milligrams of rasburicase, but this must be followed by careful monitoring of the clinical and the biochemical parameters with repeat dosing if required. In high risk children, in the absence of established clinical or laboratory tumor lysis syndrome, prophylaxis can be achieved in majority of the patients using a single dose of 0.2 milligram per kg rasburicase. Treatment needs to be followed by close laboratory and clinical monitoring for evidence of progressive tumor lysis syndrome. While it seems reasonable to use as in adults a fixed dose of 3 milligrams of rasburicase, it is not possible to make a firm recommendation on the basis of the current evidence. Where rasburicase is being used in the treatment or prophylaxis of tumor lysis syndrome, the addition of allopurinol is unnecessary and has the potential to reduce the effectiveness of rasburicase. Urinary alkalization is not recommended in tumor lysis syndrome prophylaxis. The treatment of an established tumor lysis syndrome, what they recommend is the management of an established TLS requires a multidisciplinary approach with the involvement of hematologists, nephrologists, and intensive care physicians. If facilities are not available locally for intensive management and monitoring, consideration should be given to transfer the patient to an intensive care or a high dependency facility or to a hematology center offering a higher level of care as defined by the British Committee of Standards and Hematology Criteria. The potassium must not be added to hydration fluids. Alkalization of the urine is not recommended in the treatment of tumor lysis syndrome. Allopurinol, while useful in the prophylactic setting, is not the drug of choice in established tumor lysis syndrome except in the presence of glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency or allergy to rasburicase. In the absence of contraindication, patients with established tumor lysis syndrome should be given rasburicase at a dose of 0.2 mg per kg per day. The duration of treatment should be determined by the clinical response. Asymptomatic hypocalcemia should not be treated. Symptomatic hypocalcemia should be treated with a short infusion of calcium gluconate at a dose as applicable to the age or weight of the patient, and close monitoring of calcium levels, phosphate levels, and renal function should be done. The patients with phosphate levels more than 6 or having experienced a more than 25% increase in the potassium level from baseline should have cardiac monitoring. The intractable fluid overload, hyperkalemia, hyperuricemia, hyperphosphatemia, or hypercalcemia are indications for renal dialysis. The peritoneal dialysis is not recommended for the treatment of tumor lysis syndrome. Dialysis should continue until there is adequate recovery of the renal function, resolution of severe electrolyte imbalance, and recovery of the urine output. Balanced or isotonic solutions should be administered to maintain a urine output of more than 4 ml per kg per hour for infants and 100 ml per meter square per hour for older patients. It is very interesting to know that there are very few grade 1A recommendations like potassium not being added to the hydration fluids, then fluid overload, hyperkalemia, hypophosphatemia and hypocalcemia being managed with dialysis, and dialysis should continue until there is an adequate recovery. These are the only grade 1A recommendations in the complete set of recommendations by this British Society recommendation. Then obviously hyperkalemia we have seen, we all know the etiology, how it occurs. That's the manifestations of the clinical abnormalities, which can be like the ECG changes can be used for identifying hyperkalemia, which includes tall T waves, prolonged PR interval, then broadening of the QRS complex, then finally the sine wave pattern, and finally some arrest rhythm with a VF or VT would be present. Then The muscle cramps, the weakness, and the paresthesias would be aggravated with hyperkalemia. Then, obviously, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea would be there, as we have already discussed in our clinical features. Now, about the management of it, moderate hyperkalemia is what we are going to manage. Like, patient has a potassium of 6 to 7 milliequivalents per liter, and the patient is asymptomatic. We all know that we restrict potassium intake, and ECG and cardiac rhythm monitoring should be done, and we all use our K-bind, which is nothing but the sodium polystyrene sulfonate given at 15 to 30 grams per oral and is repeated every 4 to 6 hours depending upon the follow-up serum potassium levels. Also, uh, other substances like sorbitex calcium and sodium zirconium cyclosilicate are also present, which can be used as a potassium binders. Next, in severe hyperkalemia, where potassium levels are more than 7 milliequivalents per liter, or in symptomatic patients, same as we do all the same as moderate, along with uh, ECG changes since they are there. We use calcium gluconate 1 gram via slow IV infusion, and for temporarily to shift the potassium intracellularly, use a dextrose and insulin solution, the sodium bicarbonate, and albuterol or salbutamol infusions is what we use at our place. And in hyperphosphatemia, we know that the intracellular phosphate release, when it exceeds the renal clearance capacity, we see this hyperphosphatemia manifested as acute kidney injury and secondary hypocalcemia. So when there is a moderate increase in phosphorus to more than 6 milligram per deciliter, we restrict the phosphorus intake, limit the dietary sources, avoid IV and peroral phosphorus. If tolerating oral intake, we administer phosphate binders like sevelamer 800 to 1600 milligrams per oral 3 times a day with meals, or aluminum hydroxide 300 to 600 milligrams per oral 3 times a day with meals. And in very severe cases, dialysis may be needed. In hypocalcemia, obviously it is aggravated secondary to the hyperphosphatemia and it will precipitate as calcium phosphate. It manifests as muscle twitching, cramps, tetany. There can be a carpopedal spasm, altered mental status, confusion, delirium, and hallucinations. Hypocalcemia defined as calcium less than 7 milligram per deciliter or ionized calcium less than zero point 0.8. In asymptomatic patients, no therapy is needed, and we need to avoid this calcium phosphate precipitation. Asymptomatic patients with acute hypocalcemia and hyperphosphatemia should not be given calcium repletion until the phosphorus levels have been normalized. In symptomatic patients, calcium gluconate 1 gram via slow IV infusion with ECG monitoring is done. In hyperuricemia, the intracellular uric acid release rate exceeds that of the renal clearance. So that in turn leads to the acute renal failure. And obviously we would be managing it with good fluid hydration and electrolyte management, uric acid and phosphate management, and we have to adjust the doses for as per the creatinine clearance, and finally dialysis would be preferred. So there are three specific pharmacological therapies which we'll be using in the management of tumor lysis syndrome, that is allopurinol, rasburicase, and febuxostat. So let us briefly discuss about the basics of allopurinol. Allopurinol is a potent xanthine oxidase inhibitor and which is the enzyme responsible for the conversion of hypoxanthine to xanthine and to uric acid. Dose in adults is given as 200 to 400 milligram per meter square as a single dose, or divided doses over 15 to 60 minutes. The adverse effects: the maculopapular rash, dyspepsia, nausea, vomiting, fever, and eosinophilia. Rarely, reports of interstitial nephritis, and we can expect a decrease in serum uric acid to occur in 1 to 2 days with a peak in 7 days. Dosage adjustment in renal failure is necessary to prevent the accumulation of active metabolite oxypurinol. The drug is removed by dialysis, so 50% supplemental doses administered after the dialysis. The rasburicase, uh, it is a recombinant protein that catalyzes the enzymatic oxidation of uric acid into an inactive metabolite, allantoin, that is 5 to 10 times more soluble than uric acid. Dose in adults is 0.2 milligram per kg infusion over 30 minutes once daily for up to 5 days. No dosing adjustment is required in renal or hepatic dysfunction. Adverse effects include nausea, vomiting, fever, headache, abdominal pain, constipation, diarrhea, and rashes. Rare but serious reactions have occurred, such as severe hypersensitivity reactions including anaphylaxis, hemolysis, and methemoglobinemia, contraindicated in patients deficient in glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase. So, the criteria for the use of rasburicase include uric acid more than 7.5 plus at least two risk factors, which include a serum creatinine more than 1.3, WBC more than 50,000 per microliter, and LDH greater than 2 times the upper limit of the normal. And if the serum uric acid is less than 7.5, at least three risk factors should be present. Here, being a high risk disease, serum creat more than 1.3, WBC more than 50,000 per microliter, and LDH greater than 2 times the upper limit of the normal. Febuxostat mechanism of action, it is a xanthine oxidase inhibitor and inhibits the conversion of hypoxanthine to xanthine and to uric acid at therapeutic doses. Initially, a dose of 40 mg per oral once per day may be given, which would be increased to 80 milligrams once per day if the uric acid level of 6 mg per deciliter is not achieved. Adverse effects include liver function abnormalities, rashes, nausea, arthralgia, and erythemias very rarely, which could be AF. Contraindicated in patients with liver failure, at least in patients with Child-Pugh class C, we have to use it with caution. Azathioprine and mercaptopurine should be avoided when we use febuxostat. There is one trial called the Florence trial, which was published in 2015, which was a randomized double-blind phase 3 study of febuxostat versus allopurinol for the prevention of tumor lysis in patients with hematological malignancies at intermediate to high risk of TLS. What they concluded is febuxostat achieved a significant to superior serum uric acid control with one fixed dose in comparison to allopurinol with comparable renal function preservation and safety profile. And a few differences between allopurinol and rasburicase use. Rasburicase acts within hours, so that is why in patients with high risk of TLS we would be using rasburicase. Then obviously we need to remember that we cannot use rasburicase in patients with glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, and rasburicase is only available in IV formulation, but allopurinol both IV and oral. And the biggest part is rasburicase is very expensive compared to allopurinol. That is why in patients with low risk we would still use allopurinol only, along with all the other conditions like proper hydration. As a take-home message, what I would say is the risk assessment for tumor lysis syndrome is very needed, very much important. Based on the risk assessment for acute tumor lysis syndrome, that is where the management varies. And as intensive care physicians, we need to be really sure in management of hyperuricemia, hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, and hypocalcemia, so that we would prevent further clinical manifestations. Thank you.